Hello and welcome back to the Ragamuffin Speaks. It's been a while, but I've got a new PC, which is over here and you can't see, and a new webcam, which is up here, which is lovely. And so I'm back and vlogging and talking about stuff because stuff is good. Um, but yes, here we are. So what are we going to talk about today? Right. Well, I did have a question from Anonymous. I wonder who that could possibly be. Anonymous, who could you be? And you've asked, what do you think of shipping? And do you have any ships yourself? If so, why do you ship them? And I think shipping is very important for the global economy, for getting things from A to B. I don't personally own any ships, but maybe one day I'll be. No, sorry. Obviously, we're talking about shipping. For those that you don't know, is fictional characters you think should be in a relationship, whether they canonically are within the fictional universe or they aren't. Me and shipping, I should give you some background here. I think I think when it comes to fandom, I've been an X-Men fan since I was probably about 11, something like that. I've certainly been reading the X-Men fairly regularly since the X-Men issue 1, the Chris Claremont Jim Lee one. Before that I was reading Iron Man. I was a big Iron Man fan. I still am a big Iron Man fan. But yeah, that's when I got heavily into the X-Men. I'd read a fair bit before that. I had some classic X-Men stuff, and I picked up some of the Fall of the Mutants, Silvestri Claremont stuff, and I like that. And I'd read quite a bit of Excalibur and New Mutants at that point. That's when I got heavily into X-Men. Became a big X-Men fan. Started doing a fanzine for the X-Men at one point, which led me to getting this new fangled thing at that time called the internet. I signed up to AOL. I think that was AOL 2.0. Got online with the view to being able to get news about comics and stuff to put in the fanzine and promote the fanzine and stuff like that. But ended up getting on the Comics and Anime message board on AOL at that point, and becoming part of the online comics fandom at a very early point. That was probably 1995, and this will become relevant. The point being that at that point we were shipping before the term shipping was around. We wouldn't have called it shipping then. We were just talking about who we thought should be in a relationship and who we didn't think should be in a relationship. And I think the early ship wars would have really concerned Rogue and Gambit, or Rogue and Magneto, or Magneto if you're American. But you don't use magnetes, do you? I'm the only person I know who calls him Magneto. Everyone's like, no, you don't eat a cornito, do you? And I've lost the Americans now. But then, yeah. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, Rogue and Magneto, or Rogue and Gambit. And obviously there were a lot of Remy Rogue shippers, as you'd call them now, around then. But some of the, obviously early on, I'd read the Savage Land issues with Rogue and Magneto, and beautifully drawn and lovely stuff, and that had always stuck in my head as a good relationship, as an interesting one, as Rogue and Magneto. And then obviously Age of Apocalypse happened, in which they were married and had a kid, and it just makes sense. And it's always been this ongoing background romance, whereas there was the big Remy and Rogue thing that, you know, a lot of the fangirls at the time thought was wonderful, because, you know, swoon, Remy, he's so sexy. But yeah, so where was I? Of course, there was the horrible bit of the incident with the cave and Gambit and Rogue and Magneto was watching, and we won't go into that though. That was a strange one. Yeah. So yeah, what do I think of shipping? Obviously, it's just natural. I think most people reading a comic will have an opinion on the relationships in it, or any fandom will have an opinion on the relationships in it, and that's all it is, really. I don't think shipping is a thing that there's a term for it that we use within fandom that most people find odd, but it's just something that people naturally do when they read anything or watch any show. Uh, so ships that I have myself, obviously, as I've mentioned, Rogue and Magneto, definitely. But I think those who know me well will know the big one for me is Kitty Pryde and Pete Wisdom. For a lot of reasons. Obviously, I've always liked Kitty. One of the first comics I ever read was He'll Never Make Me Cry, which was Uncanny X-Men issue, I can't remember off the top of my head, I'm going to say 283. Is it no, 183? Yeah, 183, I think, off the top of my head, without going to Google now and interrupting the video. Which is Colossus Bioita has come back from the Secret War, where he met and fell in love with this other woman and they had sex. And he's come back. She dies during the Secret War. And he comes back to Kitty. And at the time, I think he's, 18? She's 13. It had been a teen romance, a crush for both of them. And obviously, while he's away in the Secret War, he grows up a bit, you'd like to think. And he has this more adult relationship, and he has sex, and it's a more mature thing. And coming back, he realizes there's this 13-year-old girl, and this is not going to work. As fond of her as he is, he's moved on to something a bit more grown up, and so he, I think, quite rightly breaks up with her, but he really breaks her heart, and it's very much written from her point of view. You get literally inside her head because of the thought bubbles, and it's some Claremont's best writing by far. And this is one of the first things I've read, and I was 8 or 9 at the time, maybe a little older, I don't know, about that. And I instantly felt an attachment to the character Kitty, and she was going through this horrible pain, and so naturally I didn't like this Colossus guy. I thought he was a jerk. And so, yeah, I followed Kitty throughout. I later on I'd stumbled across early Excalibur in Forbidden Planet in Glasgow, on one holiday with my grandparents, and opened it up, and there's this Kitty Pryde again. Only now she's being drawn by Alan Davis, and she happened to look exactly, that's uncannily, exactly like the girl I was going out with at the time. I was 10, 11 maybe. That was weird. And so that made me like her even more. And I followed Kitty for years after, and then I guess around the age of now 18, 19, and I'm reading Excalibur, and Kitty's now, in the weird way that Comic Time works, about the same age as me, and she meets this guy Pete Wisdom, who is a British guy, so naturally I kind of identify with the British guy. And for her, it's that moment that obviously Pioita had when he was 18, of her first proper mature adult relationship. She properly falls in love with the guy, and it's wonderful. And I think I for me, that whole relationship worked really well. And it's written by Warren Ellis, and you don't get many better. There are a few writers in comics who are better than Warren. And that run on Excalibur was superb. And I know, yeah, Transmet is stupidly good, and Planetary is wonderful, and he's written amazing stuff outside of superhero comics. But if you want good superhero comics, he does write good superhero comics, especially Excalibur. And he, coming in to write Kitty Pryde, his view was that he wanted to write a more grown-up Kitty Pryde, and he did that, and he did that well. And then they broke up and stuff and blah, and yeah, and there was stuff. So that's the that was in answers to do I have any ships myself? Yes, I do. Most of the ships I have are canon. To be honest, I tend to, I like canon ships. I don't like. Well, that's it. I can't stand Scott Summers and Emma Frost. That makes no sense to me. Not unless she's up to something, which I think she is. I do ship Tony and Steve just because you have to. You can't not. It's adorable. They're lovely. And there's something lovely about the way the fandom does stuff with them. And I understand why some people dislike that some people will automatically ship any two guys that are friends, and that's I understand problems with that. But Tony, Steve, they're married in an AU. It makes sense. Other ships I have. Just see, outside of comics, do I have any ships? I don't know. See, not really outside of comics. I mean, Dr. Riversong, yeah, but that's kind of, they just got married. It's not. That's no great shakes, Dr. Romana, though, yes. I mean, because that was never confirmed. Dr. Nissa, Dr. Master, especially 5 and Amy Master. So yeah, I have a fair amount of Doctor Who ships. Yeah. So why do I ship them? Well, I've kind of talked about that. And yeah, this is getting long now, so I should probably stop. But I think generally, ship who you want to ship. Enjoy fiction on whatever level you want to enjoy it on. Read subtext is there to be read. Whether it's intentional or not, because we could have a long discussion about authorial intent, but we won't. But yeah, whether the subtext is there to be read. It doesn't. My reading of something or your reading of something doesn't affect anybody else's reading. If you want to read Tony and Steve as just two friends, and that's that, and they're two straight guys, then that's fine. You do that. You read it that way, but just accept that other people aren't going to read it that way, and will read Steve as a guy who is a product of the 1940s, and so in his head there is no option other than being straight, and so if he's going to be repressed when it comes to his sexuality. And Tony, I don't think Tony's fussed. I think Tony is, to a certain extent, if it moves, fuck it, and if it's not moving, then kick it till it moves, and then fuck it. That's the way he is. I think he's generally fairly straight, but at the same time, he's open to pretty much anything, and I think he appreciates a bit of Steve. And I think there's a real emotional bond there that no matter how much they disagree or fight, they will always be there for each other, and they will always care about each other and love each other. Which is a fascinating dynamic, and I can see why it's a joy to write, and I think Bendis writes it particularly well. But yeah, I should probably wind up now because I've already passed 15 minutes, and I hope, because I'm doing this in HD, I hope I'm going to be able to upload it without being YouTube rejecting it. So we'll see. Until next time, bye bye.